The banker's words hit Grace Dalton like a physical blow that December morning in 1883. His declaration that she had until spring to vacate her husband's property, echoing through the frozen streets of Salina, Kansas, long after she stumbled from his office into the biting winter wind. Grace stood on the wooden sidewalk, her black morning dress whipping around her ankles, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air as she tried to comprehend how quickly her world had crumbled. 3 months ago, she had been Mrs. Robert Dalton, wife of a struggling but honest shopkeeper. Now she was a widow with debts she never knew existed, about to lose the only home she had known since coming west from Philadelphia 5 years ago. The shop that Robert had poured his heart into had been mortgaged twice over, and the banker, Mr. Thornton, had made it abundantly clear that a woman alone had no business trying to run a mercantile in a town like Salina. The winter sun hung low and pale in the afternoon sky, offering no warmth as Grace walked slowly back toward the shop. Her hands trembled inside her thin gloves, though whether from cold or fear, she could not say. Spring seemed both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. 4 months to figure out where she would go, how she would survive. She had no family to return to back east. Her parents had died when she was 19, and marrying Robert had been as much about survival as it had been about affection. She had cared for him, certainly, but theirs had been a practical union born of mutual need rather than grand passion. The bell above the shop door chimed as she entered, the sound hollow in the mostly empty space. Robert had been sick for nearly a year before he died, and the shop's inventory had dwindled as he became too weak to make the trips to Kansas City for supplies. Grace had tried to keep things going, but women did not conduct business on credit, she learned quickly. Suppliers wanted payment up front, and what little money they had went to the doctor and then to the undertaker. She moved through the dim interior, past the half-empty shelves, to the small living quarters in the back. The rooms were cold, the fire having burned down to embers while she was at the bank. She added wood mechanically, her mind churning through impossible options. She could try to find work, but respectable positions for women were scarce. She could seek charity from the church, but the thought made her stomach turn. She had always been self-sufficient, always found a way forward. This time, however, the path seemed to vanish into darkness no matter which direction she looked. The afternoon faded into evening, and Grace found herself standing at the window, watching the people of Salina pass by on the street. Families heading home for supper, shopkeepers closing up for the night, cowboys riding in from the surrounding ranches. The town had grown in the 5 years she had been here, the railroad bringing commerce and opportunity. Just not for her, apparently. A knock at the shop door startled her from her thoughts. Through the glass, she could see a tall figure silhouetted against the gas lamp across the street. For a moment, she considered not answering, but something made her cross the room and turn the lock. The man who stood on her threshold was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a heavy canvas coat and leather gloves, and snow dusted his broad shoulders. Grace recognized him vaguely as someone she had seen around town, but they had never spoken. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am Owen Whitmore. I have a ranch about 8 miles north of town." Grace waited, uncertain what business a rancher might have with her at this hour. When she did not speak, he continued, "I heard about your situation. Word travels in a town this size." Heat flooded Grace's cheeks despite the cold. Of course people were talking. The poor widow being turned out, the dead shopkeeper's debts, the scandal of a woman alone. She started to close the door, but Owen's next words stopped her. "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." I am not interested in that sort of proposition, Grace said sharply, anger giving her voice strength. Owen's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect. That is not what I am offering. I need a wife. You need a home. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. You are asking me to marry you. We do not even know each other. That is true enough. But I know you ran this shop while your husband was sick. I know you are not afraid of hard work. And I know you have nowhere to go come spring. He paused, his gaze steady. I am offering you a way to stay. The words hung in the cold air between them. Grace's mind reeled, trying to make sense of this stranger's bizarre offer. Why would you want a wife you do not know? Surely there are younger women, women without complications. I do not want a love match, Owen said bluntly. I want someone capable and sensible who will not have foolish expectations. My ranch does well enough, but it is isolated. I need someone to help manage the house, to handle the domestic side of things so I can focus on the cattle and the land. In return, you would have security and a place that is yours. We could draw up papers, if you like, outlining the terms. This is insane, Grace whispered, but even as she said it, her practical mind was turning over the possibility. What other options did she have? She could try to make her way to another town, start over with nothing, hope to find work as a seamstress or a laundress. Or she could accept this strange proposal and have, if not comfort, at least stability. Think about it, Owen said. I will be in town for the next few days. You can send word to the hotel if you decide you are interested in discussing terms. He turned to leave, then looked back over his shoulder. For what it is worth, I am sorry for your loss. Robert Dalton was a good man. He just had bad luck. Then he was gone, his boots crunching in the snow as he walked away, leaving Grace alone with a decision that seemed impossible and yet somehow inevitable. Sleep eluded Grace that night. She lay in the bed she had shared with Robert, staring at the ceiling, weighing Owen Whitmore's proposal from every angle. It was improper, certainly. They had not courted, barely knew each other's names. What would people say? But then, people were already talking, already judging her for her husband's failures and her own precarious position. At least as Owen's wife, she would have standing, respectability of a sort. She rose before dawn and dressed carefully, her morning black the only decent dress she owned. In the gray morning light, she wrote a brief note asking Owen to call on her that evening to discuss his proposal. She paid a boy a nickel to deliver it to the hotel, then spent the day in a fog of nervous anticipation and dread. Owen arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. Grace had tidied the shop's living quarters as best she could, though there was no hiding the worn furniture and the bare patches on the floor where Robert had sold the rugs to pay for medicine. She served coffee with shaking hands, and they sat across from each other at the small table like strangers conducting a business transaction, which, Grace supposed, was exactly what they were doing. I have conditions, Grace said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Owen nodded. As do I. I will not be treated as a servant. If I am to be your wife, even in name only, I expect to be respected as the lady of the house. Agreed. And you will have access to household accounts. I am not a wealthy man, but we do well enough. You would not want for necessities. Grace took a breath. What exactly are you expecting from this marriage? Owen met her eyes directly. I need someone to run the household, manage the domestic work. Cooking, cleaning, perhaps tending a garden come spring. I have 2 men who work the ranch full-time, and we hire on extra help during roundup and branding. That means feeding additional mouths several times a year. I also need someone who can handle basic accounting, track supplies and expenses. And that is all. A muscle worked in Owen's jaw. I will not force unwanted attentions on you if that is what you are asking. We can maintain separate rooms. This would be a partnership, not a romantic entanglement. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, some reason why a man in his prime would choose such an arrangement. But Grace did not press. She had secrets of her own, after all. Grief she did not feel deeply enough, relief mixed with the sorrow, guilt over her own survival. When would this marriage take place? She asked. As soon as you are willing. I need to return to the ranch within the week. The cattle need tending and I have been away too long already. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. A week. He was asking her to upend her entire life in a week, to marry a stranger and move to an isolated ranch 8 miles from town. It was madness. It was also her only real option. I need 2 days to settle my affairs here, she heard herself say. To speak with Mr. Thornton at the bank and make arrangements for the shop's inventory. You can take whatever you want from here. Furnishings, personal items, whatever you need. Grace nearly laughed. There was almost nothing left worth taking. That will not be necessary. But I appreciate the offer. Owen stood, his height suddenly overwhelming in the small room. I will arrange for the ceremony in 3 days then. Will that suit you? Yes, Grace whispered. That will suit me fine. After he left, Grace sat alone in the gathering darkness and wondered what she had just agreed to. She had met Owen Whitmore twice, spoken with him for perhaps an hour total, and now she was going to become his wife. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed the panic down. She had survived her parents' deaths, a rushed marriage, 5 years in a hard land, and widowhood at 24. She would survive this too. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Grace visited the bank, where Mr. Thornton seemed both surprised and smugly satisfied by news of her impending marriage. The shop's debts would be settled by Owen as part of the marriage agreement, and what little inventory remained could be sold to cover the costs. She packed her few personal belongings, her mother's cameo brooch, some letters, her 2 other dresses and her nightgown. Everything else she left behind without sentiment. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon at the small Lutheran church on the edge of town. Grace wore her black mourning dress, unable to afford anything new and unwilling to ask Owen for money before they were even married. The pastor, Reverend Schultz, had looked uncomfortable with the hasty arrangement but had agreed to perform the ceremony. There were no guests, only the Reverend's wife as witness. Owen wore a clean shirt and jacket, his hair recently cut, his face freshly shaved. He spoke his vows in a firm, clear voice, his expression unreadable. Grace repeated the words in barely more than a whisper, her hand cold in his when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The kiss that sealed their union was brief and perfunctory, his lips barely brushing hers. And just like that, Grace Dalton became Grace Whitmore, wife to a man she did not know, on her way to a home she had never seen. They left Salina that same afternoon, Grace sitting beside Owen on the wagon seat, her small trunk secured in the back along with supplies Owen had purchased from the general store. The winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon, turning the snow-covered prairie into a sea of gold and shadow. The cold was brutal, and Grace pulled her thin cloak tighter, wishing she had warmer clothes. Owen noticed her shivering and reached behind the seat, pulling out a heavy buffalo robe. "Here," he said, draping it over her lap. "It is a hard drive in winter." The gesture was practical rather than affectionate, but Grace appreciated it nonetheless. "Thank you." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the jingle of the harness, and the wind across the empty land. Grace studied the landscape, trying to memorize landmarks, though everything looked the same to her city-raised eyes. Endless white prairie broken by occasional stands of cottonwood trees along frozen creek beds. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. Owen kept his eyes on the horses. "It is about 800 acres. I run about 300 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, a decent kitchen. There is a barn, a bunkhouse for the hands, and some other outbuildings." "How long have you had it?" "4 years. I worked as a ranch hand for nearly 10 years before that, saved every penny. When the previous owner decided to sell and move back east, I was able to buy him out." Grace heard the pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands and sweat. That must have been difficult, saving for so long. "It was the only way. I came west with nothing but a horse and a saddle. Everything I have now I earned." There was a story there, Grace sensed, but she did not ask. They were still strangers, after all, bound by law but not by trust or understanding. That would take time if it came at all. The sun had set completely by the time they turned off the main road onto a narrow track that led north. In the darkness, Grace could make out very little, just the vague shapes of buildings ahead. Then Owen pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a house that was little more than a dark outline against the starry sky. "Welcome home," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been uncertainty. Owen helped Grace down from the wagon, his hands firm on her waist, gone as soon as her feet touched the ground. He retrieved her trunk and led the way to the house, pushing open the door to reveal a dark interior. The scratch of a match, a flare of light, and then the warm glow of a lamp filling the space. Grace stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the light. The main room was larger than she had expected, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but well made. A wooden table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, a few shelves holding books and other items. Everything was clean but cold, the fire long since burned out. "I will get the stove going," Owen said, moving toward the kitchen area. "It will warm up quickly." Grace set down her small bag and looked around. This was her home now, this rough house on the isolated prairie. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to cry, but she swallowed it down. She had made her choice. There was no point in lamenting it now. "Where should I put my things?" she asked. Owen paused in his work with the stove. "The bedroom on the right is yours. Mine is on the left. I changed the linens this morning before I left for town." Grace nodded and carried her trunk into the indicated room. It was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A single window looked out onto darkness. She set the trunk at the foot of the bed and removed her cloak, hanging it on a peg by the door. Her hands were numb with cold, and she rubbed them together, trying to restore feeling. When she returned to the main room, Owen had the stove crackling with fire and was putting coffee on to boil. "There is stew from yesterday," he said without looking at her. "It is not much, but it will do for tonight." "I can prepare something," Grace offered. "No need. Sit and warm yourself. Tomorrow will be soon enough to begin." They ate in awkward silence, the stew surprisingly good, hearty with beef and vegetables. Grace realized she had eaten almost nothing all day, too nervous and preoccupied to think about food. Now, with hot food in her belly and warmth seeping back into her bones, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. "You should rest," Owen said, noticing her drooping eyelids. "It has been a long day." Grace did not argue. She cleaned her bowl and spoon, found the wash basin, and retreated to her small bedroom. She changed into her nightgown with stiff fingers, then slipped between the cold sheets. The bed was harder than what she was used to, the room unfamiliar and strange. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of Owen moving about the house, the creak of the floorboards, the scrape of a chair. Eventually, she heard his bedroom door close, and the house fell silent except for the wind outside and the occasional pop from the dying fire. Grace stared into the darkness and wondered what she had done. She woke to gray dawn light and the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The wedding, the journey, this new life she had chosen. She dressed quickly in the cold room, smoothed her hair as best she could without a proper mirror, and ventured out into the main room. Owen was already up, dressed in work clothes, standing by the stove. He looked up when she entered. "Morning. There is coffee and I can fry some eggs if you are hungry." "I can do that," Grace said. "You must have work to attend to." "I do, but I wanted to show you around first, help you get your bearings." They ate quickly, and then Owen led her outside into the bitter morning. The ranch looked different in daylight, more substantial than she had imagined in the darkness. The house was a simple frame structure painted white, with a front porch that wrapped around one side. The barn was large and well-maintained, and she could hear cattle lowing in the distance. "The well is here," Owen said, showing her a sturdy pump near the house. "Water is good, does not run dry even in summer. The outhouse is there behind those trees. The root cellar is accessed through the kitchen, and it is well stocked for winter." Grace nodded, trying to take in all the information. Owen walked her to the barn where several horses nickered in their stalls. "This is Josie," he said, patting the neck of a gentle-looking mare. "She is good-natured. When the weather is better, I will teach you to ride if you do not already know how." "I do not," Grace admitted. In Philadelphia, she had ridden in carriages, not on horseback. "It is useful out here. You might need to go to town alone sometimes, and a wagon is cumbersome for one person." They continued the tour, Owen pointing out the bunkhouse where his two hands stayed, though both men were apparently out checking on the herd. Grace met chickens in a small coop, learned where tools were stored, where firewood was stacked. By the time they returned to the house, her head was spinning with details. "I know it is a lot to take in," Owen said, "but you will learn, and I am here if you have questions." "Thank you," Grace said, meaning it. Whatever the strangeness of their arrangement, Owen was at least trying to make the transition easier. He left shortly after, riding out to join his men, and Grace was alone in her new home. She stood in the center of the main room and took a deep breath. This was her life now. She could either wallow in uncertainty, or she could take control of what she could. She chose to work. Grace spent the day exploring the house more thoroughly, taking inventory of what was available and what was needed. The kitchen was better stocked than she had expected, with flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, and other staples. The root cellar held potatoes, carrots, turnips, and apples. There were canned goods on shelves, vegetables and fruits that someone had put up the previous summer. Owen, she supposed, or perhaps he had hired someone. She found cleaning supplies and set about scrubbing the house from top to bottom. It was not truly dirty, but the activity gave her a sense of purpose, a way to put her stamp on the space. She washed windows, swept floors, dusted shelves, beat rugs. By the time Owen returned in the late afternoon, the house gleamed and a pot of soup simmered on the stove, filling the air with savory warmth. Owen stopped in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the transformed space. "You have been busy," he said. "I thought I should earn my keep," Grace replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Something shifted in Owen's expression, something that looked almost like respect. "You do not need to prove anything, but I appreciate the effort." They fell into a routine over the following days. Owen rose before dawn and spent his days outside working the ranch, repairing fences, checking on cattle, cutting firewood, and tending to the 1,000 other tasks that running a spread required. Grace managed the house, cooking substantial meals, keeping everything clean and organized, mending clothes and learning the rhythms of this new life. They spoke little, their conversations limited to practical matters. What supplies were running low, whether more snow was coming, how the cattle were faring. But a tentative familiarity was growing between them, a sense of partnership built on shared work and mutual respect. Grace had been at the ranch for 2 weeks when she met the ranch hands. She heard men's voices outside one afternoon and looked out to see Owen talking with 2 riders. He brought them to the house, stomping snow from their boots before entering. "Grace, these are my men. Tom Brennan and Charlie Hayes." Tom was older, perhaps 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Charlie was young, barely 20, with a quick smile. Both men removed their hats and nodded respectfully. "Madam," Tom said, "it is good to finally meet you." Owen said he had gotten himself a wife, but we thought he might be pulling our legs. Grace felt herself blush. "It is nice to meet you both." "We do not mean to intrude," Charlie added. "We just wanted to introduce ourselves proper-like." "You are not intruding," Grace assured them. "Would you like coffee? I just made a fresh pot." The men stayed for an hour, warming themselves and drinking coffee, talking about the ranch and the cattle and the weather. Grace liked them both immediately, Tom with his dry humor and Charlie with his earnest enthusiasm. When they left, she felt less isolated, more connected to this place. "They seem like good men," she said to Owen after they had gone. "They are the best. I trust them completely." It was a simple statement, but it told Grace something important about her husband. He valued loyalty and competence, and he did not give his trust easily. She filed that information away, adding it to the small collection of facts she was accumulating about Owen Whitmore. Winter deepened, and Selena seemed a world away. Some days, Grace went from dawn to dusk without seeing another soul besides Owen, Tom, and Charlie. The isolation was profound in a way she had never experienced in town, but she found it less oppressive than she had feared. There was something peaceful about the silence, the endless white prairie, the simple rhythm of work and rest. She and Owen developed an unspoken understanding. He was unfailingly polite, considerate in his own gruff way. He noticed when the firewood supply in the house ran low and made sure it was replenished. He brought her things from the barn, fresh eggs from the chickens, a haunch of venison when he shot a deer. She cooked meals he clearly enjoyed, kept his clothes mended, made sure the house was comfortable and welcoming after long days in the brutal cold. But there was a distance between them, a careful formality. They were partners, roommates, not husband and wife in any real sense. Grace told herself she was content with that. It was what she had agreed to, after all. Yet sometimes, when Owen sat by the fire in the evenings reading or mending tack, she found herself watching him, wondering about the man behind the reserved exterior. It was late January when the first real storm hit. Grace had been watching the sky all day, noticing the strange yellowish cast to the clouds, the way the wind had died to an eerie stillness. Owen came in early, his expression grim. "Bad one coming," he said. "We need to make sure we are prepared. Tom and Charlie are securing the barn and making sure the cattle are in the near pasture. We might be stuck inside for a few days." Grace had experienced winter storms in town, but this was different. They were isolated, miles from help if anything went wrong. "What do you need me to do?" "Make sure we have enough water in the house. Fill every container we have. Check the food supplies, make sure the fire is built up. Once this hits, we will not be going outside unless it is absolutely necessary. They worked together, Owen bringing in extra firewood and stacking it inside the house, Grace hauling water from the pump until her arms ached. The chickens were secured in their coop, the horses in the barn. By the time Owen, Tom, and Charlie came back from checking the herd, the first snow was beginning to fall. "It is going to be a bad one," Tom said, shaking snow from his coat. "I have seen that sky before." "You and Charlie stay in the house tonight," Owen said. "The bunkhouse is not insulated enough for what is coming." The two men did not argue. They all shared a hasty supper, and then they settled in to wait. The wind picked up with terrifying speed, howling around the house like a living thing. Snow pelted the windows with a sound like thrown sand. The temperature plummeted. Grace had never experienced anything like it. The storm was a physical presence, a roaring beast that shook the house and made her wonder if the walls would hold. Owen kept the fire going, and they all stayed close to the hearth, wrapped in blankets. The men took turns keeping watch, making sure the fire did not die, checking that snow was not drifting in through any cracks. The storm lasted 2 days. For 2 days they were trapped inside, the world beyond the windows a white fury. Grace cooked on the stove, rationing their supplies, making sure there was always hot coffee and warm food. The men played cards, told stories, dozed in shifts. Grace mended clothes, knitted, tried to stay calm despite the howling wind and the creaking walls. On the second night, the wind finally began to die. By morning, an eerie silence had fallen. Owen ventured outside first, forcing the door open against the snowdrift that had piled against it. Grace followed him out and gasped. The world was buried. Snow had drifted against the house, the barn, every structure. It was waist-deep in places, glittering in the weak winter sun. The prairie had disappeared, transformed into an alien landscape of white hills and valleys. "Dear God," Grace whispered. "We need to check on the animals," Owen said. "Tom, Charlie with me." "Grace, stay inside and keep the fire going." The men spent the day digging out, checking on the livestock. Miraculously, they had lost only a few chickens and 2 head of cattle that had wandered too far from the herd. The horses were fine. The barn had held. By evening, everyone was exhausted but grateful. "That was too close," Tom said as they sat around the table that night, eating stew and biscuits. "It is the worst I have seen in 4 years," Owen agreed. "We were lucky." Grace looked around at these 3 men, snow-covered and weary, and felt something shift inside her. They had weathered the storm together, depended on each other, survived. She was part of something here, part of a team. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was real and solid and hers. That night, after Tom and Charlie had returned to the bunkhouse, Owen lingered by the fire. Grace was cleaning up the supper dishes, and he watched her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," he said finally. Grace looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For not panicking during the storm, for keeping things together, for being steady." "I did not do anything special," Grace protested. "You did more than you know." Owen paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I know this is not what you wanted, this life, this arrangement. But you have made the best of it. That takes courage." Grace felt a lump form in her throat. It was the most personal thing Owen had said to her since their wedding. "You gave me a way to stay," she said softly. "When I had nowhere else to go, I owe you a great deal. You owe me nothing. This is a partnership, remember? We help each other." He stood then, the moment passing, and bid her good night. But as Grace lay in bed that night, listening to the silence after the storm, she realized something had changed. The careful formality between them had cracked, just a little, and she found herself curious about what might grow in that small opening. February brought bitter cold but no more major storms. The days gradually lengthened, the sun climbing a little higher each afternoon. Owen taught Grace to feed the chickens, how to milk the cow they kept for dairy, how to recognize signs of trouble in the livestock. She proved an apt student, eager to learn and unafraid of hard work. One afternoon, Owen came in from the barn with a strange expression on his face. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." Curious, Grace pulled on her coat and followed him to the barn. In a corner stall, a black and white cow was lying in the straw, and beside her was a wobbly newborn calf, all legs and big eyes. "Oh," Grace breathed, enchanted. "When did this happen?" "Just now. I thought you might like to see." They stood together, watching the calf struggle to its feet, the mother lowing softly and licking its coat. There was something miraculous about it, this new life in the dead of winter, this promise of continuity and renewal. "She is beautiful," Grace said. "She is. We will have more come spring. The herd will grow." Grace glanced at Owen and found him watching her rather than the calf. There was warmth in his eyes, a softness she had not seen before. Her heart did an odd little skip, and she looked away, confused by her own reaction. "Thank you for showing me," she said quietly. "I thought you should know. You are part of this now. The ranch, everything that happens here, it is yours as much as mine." The words settled over Grace like a warm blanket. Yours as much as mine. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that, to feel truly included rather than just tolerated. As they walked back to the house, their shoulders nearly touching, Grace realized that her feelings were shifting. Owen was no longer just the stranger who had offered her a convenient escape. He was becoming real to her, a flesh and blood man with kindness and integrity, someone she was beginning to genuinely respect and perhaps care for. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The days passed, winter slowly loosening its grip on the land. Grace found herself paying more attention to Owen, noticing small things about him. The way he always checked the horizon before going inside, as if cataloging the weather and the land. The gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses, despite their size and strength. The rare, brief smile that transformed his serious face. The way he read by firelight in the evenings, his brow furrowed in concentration. She began to wonder about his past, the life he had lived before the ranch. He had mentioned working as a ranch hand, coming west with nothing, but the details remained elusive. One evening, emboldened by the comfortable silence between them, she asked, "Where are you from originally?" Owen looked up from his book, surprise flickering across his face. "Missouri, a little town outside of St. Louis. Why do you ask?" "I realized I know very little about you. It seemed strange given that we are married." A wry smile tugged at his lips. "I suppose that is fair." "What would you like to know?" Grace set down her mending. "Why did you come west?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My father was a difficult man. He drank, and when he drank, he used his fists. My mother died when I was 15, and after that, there was nothing to keep me there. I left as soon as I was old enough, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find. Eventually, I ended up in Kansas, and I found I was good with cattle and horses. The rest just grew from there." The simple words painted a harsh picture, and Grace's heart ached for the boy he had been. "I am sorry, that must have been very hard. It was a long time ago." Owen's voice was carefully neutral, but Grace could hear the old pain underneath. "What about you? What brought you west?" "Desperation," Grace said honestly. "My parents died within a year of each other when I was 19. I had no family, no means to support myself. A friend introduced me to Robert, who was heading west to open his shop. He needed a wife, I needed security. It was practical." "Did you love him?" The question should have seemed impertinent, but somehow it did not. "I cared for him," Grace said slowly. "He was a good man and he treated me well, But no, it was not a grand passion. I think we both knew that going in. And yet you mourned him. Of course. He was my husband, and he suffered at the end. I would not wish that on anyone. Owen nodded, seeming to understand. It seems we both know something about practical marriages. Yes, Grace agreed. Though I think this one might be turning into something more than I expected. The words were out before she could stop them, too honest, too revealing. Owen's eyes sharpened, and he set his book aside completely. What do you mean? Grace felt heat creep up her neck, but she held his gaze. I mean that I am finding I enjoy your company, that I respect you. That this does not feel as much like a business arrangement as it did at the beginning. The silence stretched between them, charged with something new and fragile. Finally, Owen spoke, his voice rough. I have been thinking the same thing. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. Have you? Yes. You are not what I expected, Grace. You are stronger than I thought, kinder. You make this house feel like a home, not just a place to sleep. I find myself looking forward to the evenings, to the time we spend talking, to having you here. I am glad, Grace whispered. I was not sure if you felt the same. Owen stood and crossed to where she sat by the fire. He knelt beside her chair, his face level with hers, his eyes searching. I know this is not what we agreed to. If you want to keep things as they were, I will respect that. But I would like to see if this could become something real. A true marriage, not just a partnership of convenience. Grace's breath caught. This was what she had been afraid to hope for, afraid to even acknowledge she wanted. I would like that too, she said softly. Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. May I kiss you, properly this time? Yes, Grace breathed. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss at their wedding, nothing like the dutiful kisses she had shared with Robert. This was warmth and promise, tenderness and dawning passion. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Grace, Owen said, his voice raw with emotion. I think I am falling in love with you. Tears pricked her eyes. I think I am falling in love with you too. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Grace felt the last of her defenses crumble. She wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself feel everything she had been holding back. The longing, the hope, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of real love. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling beside them. When they finally pulled apart, Owen brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch achingly tender. We can take this as slowly as you need, he said. There is no rush. Grace smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. I know, but I do not want to be apart anymore. If you are willing, I would like to truly be your wife. Owen's answer was another kiss, and this time Grace poured everything into it, all her gratitude and affection and burgeoning love. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her toward his bedroom, she did not protest. This was what she wanted, what they both wanted, this joining of bodies and hearts. The morning after brought no awkwardness, only a quiet joy. Grace woke in Owen's arms, sunlight streaming through the window, and felt a contentment she had never known. Owen stirred beside her, his arms tightening around her waist. Good morning, he murmured against her hair. Good morning. They lay there for a while, reluctant to leave the warmth of the bed and each other. But eventually, duty called, and they rose and dressed, stealing kisses and sharing smiles like love-struck youngsters. Over breakfast, Owen reached across the table and took her hand. I want you to know that last night meant everything to me. You mean everything to me. Grace squeezed his fingers. You mean everything to me too. The days that followed were a revelation. The careful distance that had characterized their early marriage evaporated, replaced by easy affection and growing intimacy. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Owen spoke of his dreams for the ranch, wanting to expand the herd, perhaps add some horses to breed and sell. Grace talked about maybe having a real garden come spring, flowers as well as vegetables, making the ranch beautiful as well as productive. "I would like that," Owen said. "You should do whatever you want with the place. Make it yours." "Ours," Grace corrected gently. "Make it ours." Owen smiled, that rare, brilliant smile that made her heart flutter. "Ours," he agreed. March arrived, bringing the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and muddy ground. The cattle grew restless, ready for fresh grazing. Owen and his men spent long days repairing winter damage, preparing for the busy season ahead. One afternoon, as Grace was hanging laundry to dry in the surprisingly mild breeze, she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. She shaded her eyes and watched as a buckboard made its way up the track toward the house. To her surprise, she recognized the driver, Mrs. Patterson, one of the more prominent women from Selena's church congregation. "Mrs. Whitmore," the older woman called out as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Grace said, though she was surprised by the visit. "Please come in. I will make tea." Mrs. Patterson followed her inside, looking around the house with frank curiosity. "You have made this place quite comfortable. Owen is lucky to have you." "I am lucky to have him," Grace said firmly, putting the kettle on. "I must admit, I was shocked when I heard about your hasty marriage." There was quite a bit of talk in town. Grace felt her spine stiffen. "I am sure there was. But I told everyone that you are a sensible woman who did what needed to be done. And now that I see you here looking healthy and content, I am glad I defended you." Grace was not sure whether to be offended or grateful. "Thank you, I think," Mrs. Patterson laughed. "I am not saying this well. What I mean is that you made an unconventional choice, but it appears to have worked out. You look happy." "I am," Grace said simply. "Very happy." They talked for an hour, Mrs. Patterson sharing town gossip and Grace realizing how much the world beyond the ranch had faded in importance. When the older woman finally left, promising to visit again, and to spread word that the new Mrs. Whitmore was doing quite well, Grace felt a sense of closure. Her old life in Selena was truly behind her. This was her home now, her real life. That evening she told Owen about the visit. He frowned slightly. "I hope she was not unkind. No, just curious. And I think she was genuinely pleased to see me happy." "Are you happy, I mean?" Grace went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and looking up into his dear face. "I am happier than I have ever been. You gave me more than a home, Owen. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love." Owen held her close, his chin resting on her head. "You gave me the same. I was just existing before, going through the motions. Now I have a reason to build something lasting. I have you." They stood together in the fading light, and Grace marveled at the strange path that had led her here. Being told to leave town had seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of the life she was always meant to have. Spring came in earnest, transforming the brown prairie into an ocean of green. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors, and the air filled with the songs of returning birds. Grace planted her garden, her hands in the earth, feeling connected to the land in a way she never had in town. Owen worked from dawn to dusk, branding new calves, moving the herd to fresh pastures, repairing fences and buildings. They made plans too, talking late into the night about their dreams. Owen wanted to build onto the house, add a proper parlor and maybe another bedroom or two. Grace wondered aloud about children, whether they might be blessed with a family. Owen had been tentative when she first mentioned it, but his eyes had lit with cautious hope. "I would like that," he admitted. I always thought I would be alone. The idea of a family of children, it is almost too much to hope for." "We can hope together," Grace said, taking his hand. In late April, Tom rode out to check on a section of fence line that had been damaged by winter storms and came back with unexpected news. He had encountered a family of homesteaders about 10 miles to the east, new arrivals trying to establish a farm. "They looked like they could use some help," Tom reported. "The man is trying to plow, but he does not have good equipment. The wife looked worn thin." Owen considered this. "Maybe we should ride over, see if they need anything. It is a hard land for people who do not know what they are doing." Grace immediately volunteered to come along, wanting to meet the family, to have contact with other women. They packed a basket of food and made the journey on a beautiful spring morning. The homestead was little more than a sod house and a rough barn, the land barely cleared. The family, the Schneiders, welcomed them with desperate gratitude. Wilhelm and Emma Schneider had 4 young children, all under the age of 10, and they had been struggling to make a go of it. "We came from Pennsylvania," Emma explained, her English heavily accented. "My Wilhelm, he wanted land of his own, but we did not know it would be so hard." Grace and Owen stayed for hours, Owen helping Wilhelm with the plow while Grace helped Emma with the children, and shared practical advice about living on the prairie. By the time they left, they had established the beginning of a friendship, and Owen had promised to come back and help with the spring planting. "You have a good heart," Grace told Owen as they rode home. "So do you. I saw how you were with those children. You will be a wonderful mother." Grace felt a warm glow at his words, at the certainty in his voice. She was beginning to believe it herself. May brought long days and hard work, but also satisfaction. The ranch was thriving, the cattle healthy and multiplying. Grace's garden flourished, neat rows of vegetables and flowers transforming the area around the house. She and Owen fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, falling into each other's arms at night. The physical intimacy between them had grown, deepening their emotional bond. Grace had never known that marriage could be like this, full of laughter and passion and partnership. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Owen turned to her with a serious expression. "You ever regret it?" "Marrying me, coming here?" Grace stared at him, startled. "No, never. Why would you ask that?" "Because you had no real choice. I gave you an ultimatum in a way, marry me or be turned out. Sometimes I worry that you feel trapped." Grace set down her glass of lemonade and turned to face him fully. "Owen Whitmore, listen to me. You did not trap me, you saved me. And more than that, you gave me the chance to find real happiness. I love you. I love this life we are building. I would choose you 1,000 times over." The tension drained from Owen's shoulders and he pulled her close. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. When I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to just staying alone out here forever, it terrifies me. But you did not. We found each other, and we have the rest of our lives to build something beautiful." "Speaking of building," Owen said, his tone shifting to something more playful, "I have been thinking about adding that parlor, and maybe we should make it 2 extra bedrooms instead of 1, just in case." Grace caught his meaning and smiled. "Just in case," she agreed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. She had not been certain enough to say anything yet, but she had her suspicions. Her monthly courses were late, and she had been feeling odd in the mornings. As if reading her thoughts, Owen's hand covered hers. "Are you?" "I think so. It is too early to be sure, but maybe." Owen let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the porch. Grace laughed, clinging to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "We are going to have a baby," Owen said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be a family. We already are a family, Grace corrected. But yes, it looks like we will be expanding. They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Grace thought back to that December day when the banker had told her to leave town by spring. She thought about Owen appearing at her door with his proposition, about the terrifying leap of faith she had taken. And she thought about everything that had followed, the hard winter, the growing closeness, the blooming love. "Thank you," she whispered against Owen's chest. "For what? For saying I was staying, for making it true." Owen tightened his arms around her. "You are staying," he said firmly. "Forever. You are mine and I am yours, and we are building something here that will last." "Forever," Grace echoed, and knew it was a promise they would both keep. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Salina when Grace and Owen made a trip to town in July. Dr. Morrison estimated the baby would come in late winter or early spring, and he pronounced Grace healthy and strong. Owen was so proud he could barely contain himself, shaking the doctor's hand vigorously and thanking him repeatedly. As they walked through town afterward, picking up supplies, Grace noticed the stares and whispers. Some were friendly, curious about the widow who had married the rancher in such haste. Others were judgmental, counting on their fingers, wondering if the baby had been conceived before the wedding. Grace held her head high, her hand in Owen's, and refused to let small-minded gossip touch her happiness. They stopped at the bank, where Owen wanted to discuss expanding his credit line for the improvements to the ranch. Mr. Thornton greeted them with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, what can I do for you today?" As Owen discussed business, Grace looked around the office where, just 7 months earlier, she had been told she had to leave. It felt like a lifetime ago. She was not that desperate, frightened woman anymore. She was Owen's wife, a rancher's wife, soon to be a mother. She had found her place, her purpose. When they finished at the bank and returned to the wagon, Grace squeezed Owen's hand. "I am glad we came. It feels like closing a circle." "What do you mean?" "This is where it all started, in a way. Where I learned I had to leave. And now I am back, but everything has changed. I have changed." Owen helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands lingering on her waist. "You have not changed. You just became more of who you were always meant to be." The summer passed in a blur of activity. Owen hired extra help to start work on the house additions, and the sound of hammers and saws became a constant backdrop. Grace continued her work in the garden and the house, though Owen and the men all fussed over her, trying to get her to rest more. She humored them sometimes, but refused to be idle. She felt strong and capable, energized by the life growing inside her. The Schneider family became regular visitors and friends. Wilhelm and Owen often worked together, sharing labor and equipment, and Emma and Grace spent hours talking and sewing baby clothes together. The Schneider children adored Grace, and she enjoyed their visits, seeing it as practice for when her own child arrived. One August afternoon, as Grace and Emma sat on the porch snapping beans, Emma confided something that had been weighing on her. "When we first came here, I was so angry with Wilhelm," she said quietly. "I wanted to go back to Pennsylvania to our families. I cried every night for weeks." "What changed?" Grace asked. "I saw how hard he was working, how much he loved the land. And then I met you and Owen, and I saw what could be built here. Now I look around at our little farm and I feel proud. This is ours. We are making something real." Grace understood completely. "It is not an easy life," she said, "but it is honest, and there is satisfaction in that." "There is," Emma agreed. "And there is freedom too. Back home, everything was already decided. Here we can make our own choices, build our own future." The conversation stayed with Grace long after Emma left. She realized that, despite the hardships, Despite the isolation and the harsh conditions, she had more autonomy and purpose than she ever had in Philadelphia or even in town as a shopkeeper's wife. She was a partner in a real enterprise, building something that would last. By September, the house additions were nearly complete. The new parlor was spacious and bright, with large windows looking out over the prairie. The 2 additional bedrooms were smaller but cozy, and Grace had already begun planning how to furnish the nursery. "It is more than I ever imagined," she told Owen as they toured the finished rooms. "You deserve more than this," Owen replied. "You deserve everything." Grace kissed him softly. "I have everything I need." Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The ranch prepared for winter, stocking supplies, making sure all the buildings were sound, readying for the cold months ahead. But this year, winter held no fear for Grace. She would face it with Owen beside her, in a solid house with plenty of provisions, waiting for the spring and the baby who would arrive with it. October brought the roundup, with Owen and his men working long days to gather the cattle and drive them to market. Grace found herself managing the ranch in Owen's absence, feeding the livestock, handling problems, making decisions. Tom and Charlie deferred to her judgment, and she discovered she was good at it, capable and confident. When Owen returned, exhausted but pleased with the prices they had gotten for the cattle, he found the ranch running smoothly. "I should go away more often," he teased. "Do not you dare," Grace retorted. "I missed you terribly." That night as they lay in bed, Grace felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings against her womb. She gasped and grabbed Owen's hand, placing it on her rounded belly. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Owen's eyes widened as the baby moved again, a tiny kick against his palm. "I felt it. I felt our baby." They stayed awake for hours, hands on Grace's belly, marveling at each movement, talking about the future, about the child who would soon join them. Grace had never been so happy, so full of hope and love. November brought the first snows, but the house was warm and snug. Grace worked on the nursery, sewing curtains and blankets, preparing everything for the baby's arrival. Owen carved a cradle from oak, working on it in the evenings, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with beeswax until it gleamed. The holidays approached, and Grace decided they should host a Christmas gathering. It would be the first time they had entertained as a married couple, and she wanted to mark the occasion. Owen agreed readily, and invitations were sent to the Schneiders, to Tom and Charlie, to a few other ranch families in the area. Grace spent days preparing, baking bread and pies, roasting a goose, decorating the house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. On Christmas Eve, the house filled with guests, laughter, and warmth. Children ran through the rooms, excited by the festivities. The adults talked and ate and sang carols. It was everything Grace had hoped for, a celebration of community and joy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emma hugged Grace tightly. "Thank you for this, for welcoming us, for being our friend. You have made this place feel like home." "You have done the same for me," Grace replied honestly. After everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, Owen and Grace sat by the fire, exhausted but content. "This was a good night," Owen said, his arm around her shoulders. "It was perfect," Grace agreed. "Everything is perfect." January brought deep cold and occasional snow, but nothing like the blizzard of the previous year. Grace was huge now, her belly swollen with the baby, moving awkwardly but still insisting on doing her share of the work. Owen worried constantly, hovering, trying to get her to rest. "I am not made of glass," Grace protested. "I know, but you are carrying our child and I will not risk anything happening to you." His concern was endearing, even when it was annoying. Grace gave in more than she might have otherwise, allowing Owen to pamper her, to fetch and carry, to fuss. February arrived, and with it, the sense that the baby could come at any time. Dr. Morrison had agreed to come to the ranch when Grace went into labor, and Owen had arranged for Emma to be there as well, to help with the birthing. On a cold, clear morning in late February, Grace woke with an odd cramping in her lower back. By noon, the pains had intensified and become regular. Owen sent Tom racing to town for the doctor and Charlie to fetch Emma. Then he stayed by Grace's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. "You are doing so well," he said as another contraction gripped her. "This is much harder than I expected," Grace gasped. "You are the strongest woman I know. You can do this." Doctor Morrison arrived first, then Emma, and the house became a flurry of activity. Owen was banished to the main room, where he paced like a caged animal, listening to Grace's cries with anguish on his face. Tom and Charlie tried to distract him, but he was beyond comfort, suffering with every sound of pain from the bedroom. Hours passed, the afternoon fading into evening. Just when Owen thought he could not bear it another moment, he heard a new sound, the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. He stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. A moment later, Emma appeared in the doorway, her face beaming. "You have a son," she announced, "and Grace is fine. They are both fine." Owen nearly collapsed with relief. He rushed into the bedroom where Grace lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she whispered. Owen approached slowly, almost reverently. Grace pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, scrunched and angry, with a shock of dark hair. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, his little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Owen breathed. "You are perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Grace placed the baby in his arms. Owen looked down at his son, this tiny person who was half him and half Grace, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was his family. This was everything that mattered. What should we name him? Grace asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Owen knew. "Henry," he said. "After my mother's father, he was the only kind person in my childhood. I would like to honor him." "Henry Whitmore," Grace said, testing the name. "I like it." "Hello, Henry." The baby made a small sound, and Owen laughed, the joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world." Dr. Morrison checked on both mother and baby, pronounced them healthy, and accepted Owen's profuse thanks and a generous payment for his services. Emma stayed to help for a few days, taking over the cooking and cleaning so that Grace could rest and bond with the baby. Those first days were exhausting and overwhelming and utterly wonderful. Henry was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches, though he woke often in the night. Owen refused to let Grace get up alone, insisting on keeping her company during the nighttime feedings, sitting beside her, holding her hand, both of them watching their son in awe. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you," Owen said one night. "But now there is Henry, and my heart just keeps expanding." "I know exactly what you mean," Grace said, gazing down at the baby in her arms. "It is like we made a whole person out of love." March arrived, and with it came the anniversary of when Grace had been told to leave Salina. She marked the date quietly, thinking about how far she had come in one short year. She had been desperate and alone, facing an uncertain future. Now she was a wife, a mother, a rancher's partner. She had a home, a family, a purpose. It was almost too much to comprehend. That evening she shared her thoughts with Owen as they sat together after putting Henry down to sleep. "A year ago I thought my life was over," she said. "And now look at us. Look at what we have built." Owen pulled her close. "A year ago, I was alone, thinking I always would be. And then you walked into my life and everything changed." "We changed each other," Grace said. "We did. We made each other better." Spring unfolded across the prairie, bringing green grass and wildflowers and new calves. Grace gradually regained her strength, and life on the ranch found a new rhythm that included Henry. He grew quickly, alert and curious, his eyes following everything around him. Owen was besotted, spending every free moment with his son, talking to him, singing to him, carrying him around the ranch. "You are going to spoil him," Grace teased. "That is my right as his father," Owen replied, utterly unrepentant. Tom and Charlie were equally smitten, taking turns holding the baby and making ridiculous faces to coax out smiles. The Schneiders visited often, their children fascinated by the new baby. Life was full and busy and good. One warm afternoon in May, as Grace worked in her garden with Henry sleeping in a basket nearby, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about Robert, her first husband, and felt a wistful gratitude. He had been a good man, and their time together, brief as it was, had taught her resilience. She thought about the banker telling her to leave and how terrified she had been. She thought about Owen appearing at her door with his outrageous proposal and the leap of faith she had taken. Most of all, she thought about Owen's words that winter day. "You are staying." Such simple words, but they had changed everything. He had given her permission to claim a place, to put down roots, to build a life. And in return, she had given him a family, a home full of love and laughter, a reason to dream beyond just survival. Owen came around the side of the house, dusty from a day's work, and his face lit up when he saw her. He knelt beside the basket, checking on Henry, then leaned over to kiss Grace. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked. "We are wonderful," Grace replied, reaching up to touch his face. "We are exactly where we are supposed to be." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the trials that came with ranching in Kansas. But Grace and Owen faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. They added to their family too, a daughter named Margaret arriving 2 years after Henry, and then another son, James, 2 years after that. The ranch prospered, the herd growing, the land improving. Owen eventually bought additional acreage, expanding their holdings. Grace's gardens became legendary in the area, bursting with vegetables and flowers, and she began selling her surplus at the market in Salina. The house, already expanded once, grew again, adding more rooms for the growing family. The Schneiders became like extended family, their children growing up alongside Grace and Owen's. More families settled in the area, and a real community developed, with barn raisings and church socials and shared celebrations. Grace found herself at the center of it, organizing events, helping new arrivals, offering advice and support. She had become what she never thought she would be, a pillar of the community, a woman of substance and respect. But through all the changes and growth, the core remained the same: Grace and Owen, loving each other more with each passing year, building a legacy that would last long after they were gone. On a summer evening when Henry was 10, Margaret 8, and James 6, the family gathered on the porch after supper. The children played in the yard, their laughter ringing out across the prairie. Grace sat in her rocking chair, mending, while Owen whittled a toy for James. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Grace asked suddenly. "If we had not married, if I had left Salina like I was told to?" Owen looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, and it terrifies me. I cannot imagine my life without you, without them." He gestured to the children. "I think about it too," Grace admitted. "And I am so grateful for that winter, as hard as it was. I am grateful for everything that brought us together." Owen set aside his whittling and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand. "I meant what I said that day at the shop. You were staying. I was not going to let you disappear, even if I had to marry you to make it happen." Grace laughed, the sound full of love and contentment. "Best decision I ever made, agreeing to marry you. Best decision I ever made, asking you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, the sun setting in a blaze of color across the endless sky. This was their life, the one they had built from desperation and necessity, from courage and faith. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, earned and cherished and endlessly precious. Henry came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow, down by the creek?" "I do not see why not," Owen replied, "if your mother can spare us." "Of course," Grace said, "but you have to take your sister and brother too." Henry groaned theatrically, but his eyes were bright. "Fine, but Margaret has to bait her own hook this time. I can bait my own hook," Margaret shouted indignantly from across the yard. Grace and Owen exchanged amused glances, their hearts full. These moments, these ordinary, beautiful moments, were what life was all about. Not grand adventures or dramatic gestures, but the daily accumulation of love and laughter, of shared work and shared joy. As darkness fell and the children were finally herded inside for bed, Grace stood at the window, looking out over the land that had become her home. She thought about the woman she had been, alone and afraid in that cold shop in Salina, and the woman she had become, strong and confident and deeply loved. The journey between those two people had been shorter in distance than in spirit, just 8 miles from town to ranch, but it had been everything. Owen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how lucky I am," Grace said simply. "About how everything I needed was just 8 miles away waiting for me." "I was waiting for you," Owen murmured. "I just did not know it until you arrived." They stood together, husband and wife, partners and lovers, looking out at the dark prairie under a sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling, afraid, uncertain of their futures. Grace sent up a silent prayer that they, too, would find their way to the places and people they were meant to be with. She had been told to leave town by spring. A cowboy had married her that winter and said she was staying. And in doing so, he had given her not just a home, but a whole new life, a second chance at happiness, a love story that would last the rest of their days. As they turned from the window and prepared for bed, Grace took one last look at the rooms they had built together, filled now with the evidence of their shared life. Children's toys, Owen's books, her sewing, the photographs on the mantel. This was her legacy, her triumph. She had stayed, and in staying, she had found everything she never knew she wanted. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be more challenges, certainly, more hardships to overcome. But Grace no longer feared the unknown. Whatever came, they would face it together, this family they had created, this love they had nurtured. She had learned that home was not a place but a feeling, and she carried that feeling in her heart every moment of every day. She was staying. Forever and always, she was staying. And there was nowhere else she would rather be.